the co-founder of the Policy Circle. And so welcome everyone. This is a Policy Circle Texas-wide Zoom meeting. Since the beginning of this lockdown directive, the Policy Circle has been hosting a series of state-focused virtual Policy Circle conversation. We kicked it off in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin. Next week we'll be in Florida and then other regions. Just so you know, there's about 322 circles in 40 states. And the Policy Circle mission, is to inspire, is to inform and develop civic leaders. We value civic engagement with truth and details and also creativity and leading by stepping out of the box. So, this is we're excited to convene all the Policy Circle members here in Texas in this unprecedented time. We're seeing America's federalism in action. The federal government is providing some direction, signing into law relief bills to assist the response team and keep people and businesses afloat and our economy alive. And the states are really implementing orders and resources to stop the spread of this virus and the epidemic. So New York is different than Texas, and it's a good thing that our states are able to respond in a very local and nimble manner. On Friday, the House of Representatives passed a $2 trillion coronavirus economic stimulus bill, and the Senate passed the legislation. President Trump signed it into legislation after the House vote again. And, since March, there's been 3 relief bills and that have been signed into law by the federal government. And when we invite everyone to perhaps look at a brief that the Policy Circle published, that's called a Federal Debt Brief, in which we incorporated these new stimulus bills. So it gives you some perspective on how it fits in the bigger picture. So we'd like to focus a discussion today on how the federal government is signing into law these bills, and how the states and the cities are getting the intended benefits, and how that money actually goes to the cities, and what is the process through that. So I'm really excited to have people on this line. Congressman Roy Chip, thank you, Congressman Chip Roy, Roy Chip, thank you for being here. And Ellen Troxclair, who actually is a circle leader in Texas, business owner in real estate. She was the youngest woman to serve on the Austin City Council, and is continuing a lot of public policy efforts as a senior fellow with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, the Think Local Liberty, and you have a new book, which I'm going to plug in here, Step Up, How to Advocate Like a Woman, that's available on Amazon, mentions the Policy Circle, and you have a podcast as well. So Ellen, you're on the ground in Austin. And we have Congressman Chip Roy, who is legislating in DC, but is at home in Austin. Ellen, I will let you introduce Congressman Chip Roy, please.
Well, thank you to Sylvie and to everybody else who has joined this call, and especially to my friend Congressman Chip Roy. It's just really great for us to get information directly from DC, directly from the ground there. So if you're not familiar with him already, he is, one of the sharpest people that I know personally, but he's a former federal prosecutor. He's a top advisor to many prominent Texas elected officials. He previously served as chief of staff to Senator Ted Cruz and staff director to John Cornyn in his leadership office, as well as senior counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. So there is no one who kind of knows the ins and outs of the process up there better than him. He currently serves on the Budget, Oversight, and Veterans Affairs Committees and is the ranking member of the Oversight Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. His district stretches from South Austin through the Hill Country down to San Antonio, and he's just been a huge advocate for, not just, I feel like to everybody who is really concerned about the economic impact that COVID is having on our communities and our businesses. And so I really thank you for joining us today, Congressman.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you.
Well, Ellen, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you all for hosting this. These policy circles are wonderful. This is such an important part of the fabric of our ability to have conversations we need to be having. Now, this is certainly true before coronavirus. It's probably more true now that we're dealing with coronavirus. It's impacting us all. And, through everything, there's always silver linings. Hopefully that some of this is providing some opportunity for introspection and people to be able to communicate and learn tools like Zoom and figure out how to operate even though we're homebound. That's where I am. I'm at my house near Dripping Springs, Texas, just like everybody else. I'm trying to adhere to our advice and not be out engaging and trying to engage in social distancing. So I'm operating from the headquarters here. So happy to go down whatever road you want to go down and talk about whatever y'all want to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. As I said, our goal here is really to understand the decision-making process of policymakers, and then so that our audience can go beyond the headlines, ask questions, and kind of grow their sphere of influence. So, my first question is, when these bills, come to your desk, and you're asked to vote, what are your priorities when deciding how to vote in a bill? When there's a lot of unknown, there's a sense of urgency. Where does your decision-making process start? What's your starting point in thinking, and how do you consult others to move forward?
Well, it's a good question, and it's been particularly important lately because of the nature of dealing with the relief bills and how we try to process them quickly. I happen to believe that I tend to look at all bills, no matter what it is. I try to look through the lens of what's the power of the federal government and what should we be doing, right? You mentioned federalism when we first started this conversation, the importance of the differences between New York or Illinois or Texas. And it's important to allow governors to be able to do what's appropriate for their citizens in their states. And so whenever a bill comes before Congress, I think, well, is this something Congress should be doing in the first place? Then I try to look through, well, do we have the money for it? Can we afford it? Is this something we should be piling on more debt for our kids and our grandkids for if we're going to take this action? And then I try to work with my colleagues to figure out, is this the right way to do it if we're going to do something? Now, that's true for all the bills that come before us. It's been particularly intense the last 3 weeks. You mentioned that there were 3 bills that we've done with the coronavirus and the response to it. The first was an $8.3 billion bill that was designed to try to give us the tools necessary to get our game going for healthcare and responding to the virus. We also had some money that went abroad to help some other countries deal with it as well. The second package was a package that had a number of provisions in it, including an unemployment insurance and some stuff for SNAP and some food program issues. But it also had a couple of mandates in it that I wasn't particularly fond of. And the third provision was what we now know was a $2 trillion bill designed to try to bridge the gap for small businesses and for individuals and workers who have been laid off or are in a tough spot because of what we're dealing with economically. I supported the first one, happily voted for that bill. I opposed the second. And last week I supported the third bill, even though I had some reservations of what was in it. So what kind of things do we go through when we're thinking through it? Well, the first bill, I thought it was $8-point-something billion. That's a lot of money, but it was really important for us to try to jumpstart our healthcare response and our ability of our government to be able to respond and deal with the crisis that seemed to be growing. This was a few weeks ago. The bill that was 2 weeks ago that I voted against had provisions in it that I liked, but there were some mandates in the bill that would have had a negative impact and has had a negative impact on small businesses because of mandates. Now, what was that? There were provisions in the bill that was said that you had to maintain on your payroll people with sick leave, with temporary medical leave, if someone were to be affected by the virus. Well, that's well intended, but here's the problem. You can't have leave from a job you don't have. And a lot of small businesses were saying, wait a second, we can't afford to front that if you're a small business and you've got 8 employees and 4 of them get sick and you can't figure out how to maintain them on payroll and go hire more people without the federal government or the state stepping in to help. It was going to be a real problem for small businesses. And what we saw was some immediate layoffs and harming small businesses and people lose their jobs. So that was an example, if you think about process, where I was going through it thinking this isn't going to be a net good in my view. And so there are 40 of us who voted no. Of course, the Austin American-Statesman wrote an editorial saying I was the devil, and other people said that it was a terrible opinion. People are free to have their opinions, but that's the process I go through when I'm trying to think through legislation. How's it going to impact people? What's the direct result? I'm not looking at how the Austin American Statesman or the Express News or the local papers are going to respond, or what the media is going to say. I'm trying to figure out on the ground, calling people, calling business leaders, calling local leaders, and say, gosh, how is this going to affect you? And I had dozens of businesses telling me, Congressman Roy, this is going to crush us. And so for me, from my standpoint, I thought I should oppose that. This last bill, one last point that's important. Process matters in all of this, and people kind of get lost in the process. But you notice there was a congressman from Kentucky named Thomas Massey who went to the floor of the House of Representatives, and he objected to the effort to pass that legislation by voice vote. He got a lot of bad press from Republicans and Democrats. The president whacked him. Some Democrats, Republicans whacked him. I was one of the people that supported the point he was making. Now, he didn't want to vote for the legislation. I did want to support the legislation, even though it had provisions I didn't love. It was important to get that money to businesses who are hurting. But what he was objecting to was passing $2 trillion with a voice vote without a quorum present in the House of Representatives. His view, and I agree with him on this, we're supposed to be there. We're supposed to vote. We're supposed to have a majority. That's what the Constitution says, present in the chamber to be able to vote on something. And this is $2 trillion. We should vote on it. We should put our names attached to it. So we didn't actually vote on it. We passed it by voice vote in the end. But on Monday, I put my vote in the record saying how I would have voted on it, because I think it's important for constituents to know.
No, so it was really on the process, which is, you know, people want to bypass the process a lot of times, and we forget about it because it's so convoluted. But in the end, if we don't have a process and a law, then what do we stand on, right? So right. It's a good point. So thanks for making that. You know, Congress holds the strings of the purse, and so how will Congress ensure that the funds go quickly, effectively to those who need it the most and have the intended impact? And perhaps, since this is a Texan audience, you can talk about Texas, because how do you ensure that it actually goes to, the funds go out the right way?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question. It's a very important one. We're talking about $2 trillion, and you put that in context. $2 trillion that we just spent last week, or authorized, I should say, to spend. We spend less than that every year in our total domestic discretionary spending budget. I'm talking all of defense, all of every agency you know of, other than Medicare and Social Security and interest. That's what we're spending our money on. We spent $2 trillion. So we learned a lot from the so-called bailout for TARP, you know, that was about $800 billion back a decade ago in the financial crisis in 08, 09. We learned a lot about the kind of waste, fraud, and abuse that goes on. So in this legislation, for example, we passed provisions that create a number of inspectors general to put in each agency that will be providing direct reports about how the money is being spent, to be essentially watchdogs over how the money is being spent, to try to minimize waste, fraud, and abuse, which will inevitably happen and occur. Our job also is to have oversight. I sit on the Oversight Committee in the House of Representatives. And it's an important committee because it's the place where we can basically haul people before the committee and have them answer questions. I believe that's a really important function no matter which side of the aisle you're on. I took a little grief from my Republican colleagues because a couple of weeks ago, I joined with my Democrat colleagues to say that I thought that some of the leaders in the administration needed to come down and answer to the Oversight Committee because I think it's important. It's a nonpartisan issue, right? Our job in Congress is to oversee how the dollars are being spent in the executive branch. But we put some important safeguards in the legislation. It's not perfect. There's a lot of provisions in it that I think are concerning, but because we passed it in about 5 days. But we had some provisions in there that will require that the dollars be spent certain ways. So for example, we have about $350 billion in that bill allocated for small business administration to back up loans for small businesses. It's the small businesses in this country that I'm most concerned about. Yes, there's some big industries getting whacked. Airlines are an obvious example. But we've got small businesses where we're basically, through the power of government, telling them that they can't enjoy their livelihoods. Literally, we're saying to a restaurant owner, no matter whether they've built it up for 50 years, inherited it from their parents, or started it last year, we're telling them you can't have customers. That's a real issue for the American people that are suffering. So the Small Business Administration program is designed to provide immediate relief through loans that can be forgiven if they adhere to certain things. So, for example, if they maintain payroll levels at a certain amount, so we try to maintain workers on payroll. If they, maintain a certain amount of spending that's, important for their business, we've got rules in there making sure that they spend it a certain way. So our job is then to make sure that when we give these loans, it's being done that way so that the right policy objectives are being met. So between the inspectors general, between some of the provisions we put in place on how the money should be spent, we're hopeful that it will do the job that we hope it will. There are some open-ended spending in there that we're going to have to keep our eye on. That's basically given to the Treasury and the Federal Reserve to try to step in and help industries that are getting really crushed, hotel industry, others. And we're going to have to watch that like hawks to make sure that it can't be used for enrichment or fraud or abuse, and make sure that it's being spent specifically and quickly to help those who are suffering right now since we've shut down the economy.
So, can you tell us then, how do you seek input from people in your constituency? You mentioned you talk to businesses, local businesses. Do you have like a council of you form a council of local businesses, and perhaps how you kind of get some feedback on how those funds are going to them? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's a great question too. I've been a congressman for about 15 months. So we've been getting our structures in place, and we do have a few advisory councils. I have one specifically for veterans to get feedback on how veterans are cared for. I have one specifically for healthcare and doctors, so I can get feedback about what's happening in that world. We've got some developing that we're in the throes of developing for small businesses generally, and some other groups. But what I was doing in the last few weeks in particular on this issue is reach out directly. And frankly, a lot of people have been reaching out to me, and because they want to know what's happening and they want to express their opinion. Hotel owners, I talked to one the other day. He's like, look, I'm losing $150,000 a month, and I can only, hold this on for about 2 or 3 months. Another restaurant shut down 1,100 employees. They've been in the, community in San Antonio for decades, and let go 1,100 employees and lost about $3.5 million since this started. I could go through dozens of those examples. What I try to do is make myself available. When I hang up with this great Zoom gathering, I'm going to get on my cell phone and I'm going to spend most of the day just talking to individuals. And I try to make myself available, make my staff available, so that we can reach out and make sure that we know what's actually working or not. A banker this morning was giving me feedback. He was nervous yesterday morning. This morning, he got feedback that the Small Business Administration has put out guidance that is now making him feel better as a banker about how they're going to be lending to small businesses. So we're trying to make sure that that's tooled the right way. It's not perfect. When you're moving this quickly with this amount of money, with this amount of devastation to our economy, and dealing with a healthcare pandemic, there's a lot of moving parts. So I think the most important thing, for those that want to be involved, is just be thoughtful about what you think is important for your life, your business, and share that. Share that to your state reps and senators, and so that the governor's office will hear it in the state of Texas. Share it if you're a constituent of mine or another congressman or woman in Texas. Share it. Their staffs are available. We've been working close to 24 hours a day, as much as we can, to be available to our constituents. We've had constituents stuck abroad that we've been having to work to get home, from Peru, from New Zealand, from all places around the world, to deal with this current situation. But for engagement, the most important thing is just offer a suggestion. Look, feel free to criticize if you think something's wrong, but this is a moment right now to sort of drop the political, finger pointing, and instead engage with ideas and engage with ways that we can try to creatively solve problems. We've got a lot of people that are stepping in and helping do a lot of good stuff for people right now. People making masks at home, and truckers that are changing gears and doing stuff. Businesses, Brooks Brothers this morning announced that they're going to start making masks instead of clothing. So America's going to step up, and we're going to deal with this and solve this. But you on the ground, you have a business, you know how it's impacting you. I can't solve the problem if I don't know how it's impacting you. So we need to know.
Yeah, no, that's really great to share. I'd like to turn it over. That's really great. We'll be turning it over to the audience here in a minute, so people think of your questions or comments that could be helpful to Congressman Alan. You have experience in working in the city of Austin, the workings of the city. Share with us, how city works with state government, federal government to really help businesses stay afloat and productive and respond to maybe these guidelines that come from DC, or conversely also inform DC. So share a little bit with that.
Sure. I want to say, first of all, what Congressman Roy said about him being available and open is absolutely true. I texted him about concerns that I had. Both my husband and I are self-employed, and texted him about some concerns that I had, and he texted back right away. So I really appreciate him listening and being there for us. From the city perspective, I think in times like this, it is the natural instinct, I think, of a lot of people to turn to the government for the answers, right? But you have to remember that, especially your local elected officials, probably, and maybe to some lesser extent, the state and the federal government, those people have never been through this kind of unprecedented disaster either before. So they don't have all the answers, and they do need our opinion and our feedback. They do need to hear what's going on in the ground. And I think an important lesson that I've seen coming out of all of this is, regardless, the federal government is absolutely going to be throwing money at this problem to try to get our economy back up and running. And the when you put it into perspective of the money that we've spent on other things, it really is astounding. But it's actually the private sector that is stepping up in such an amazing way, right? You have a lot of private companies who are now making masks, who are trying to fill the gap in a way that the federal government really can't do. So I'm kind of hoping that people, in the midst of all this chaos and in the midst of the kids running around and screaming and figuring out how to homeschool them and worrying about our businesses and our health and our future, that people are really inspired by the spirit of the American people, inspired by the businesses who are stepping up and doing what they can to fill the gap, and just realizing that it's our kind of personal community, our families, our businesses, that are the true leaders of the country, and we're the ones who are going to get us out of this mess.
Yeah, Ellen, it sounds like when you're a business owner who could help at a national level, going through and talking to your congressman could be, such as Chip Roy, would be a path to say, hey, this is how I can convert my business effort to help with a national. And then at the local level, if it's more community, which department in the state government or the city people should turn to say, hey, this is what I could do to be helpful. What would you recommend there, or some thoughts maybe?
I think that from the big picture, certainly it has been the federal government who has taken the lead here. If you do feel like you have the capacity to fill a community need, then absolutely, I think your local representatives are the best to reach out. But whether it's your city council member or your state representative or your congressman, remember that each of those people represent their specific district, right? So regardless of which level you're reaching out to, really, each one of them is prepared and fully able to point you in the right direction of resources, of needs, and of how you can help. And I think that nonprofits, of course, are an important part of this too. And I know my church, for example, has started a way of feeding people who are in need during this time, and are soliciting contributions specifically to help people who are experiencing job loss and things like that. So yes, it's the government, but it's also nonprofits and churches as well that are stepping in. And the need is so great. I just saw that the Texas Workforce Commission fielded 1.7 million calls in one day for unemployment. And to put that in perspective, the previous record was 60,000 calls. So we've gone from previous record of 60,000 to unemployment calls of 1.7 million in one day. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the federal government has done a really good job of trying to roll back red tape and regulations that would be previously in place to try to help people. And my hope is that even after this crisis is over and once we're on the upswing, we can think, well, if we didn't need those regulations in place during a crisis, maybe we don't need them all together, right? And so that is the silver lining for me, is that hopefully some of those things can be rolled back and we can make government a little bit more efficient and effective going forward.
Great. Well, I'm going to turn it over. Judy, we have some questions from the audience. Do you want to start us to that process for the next 10, 15 minutes?
Kara, you are on and you are unmuted. Kara is a circle leader in Austin. Thanks for joining us, Kara. Go ahead.
Hi, Representative. I greatly appreciate you getting on the phone call with us, and really appreciate the work that's being done. I had a couple of things. First of all, for my own business, we were looking at the small loan application and some of the things that are involved. And what I'm wondering is, on the federal level, how quickly do you think those applications will be processed? I think right now I'm in the process of looking it over and signing paperwork, but what is your expectation on how many small businesses will get loans, and what is the process? Thank you.
Well, absolutely. And first of all, if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out directly to my office, or if I'm not actually your congressman, reach out to someone who is. But basically, our understanding is all of the guidance for all of the banks is supposed to be fully ready to go by this Friday. Given that we passed the legislation last Friday, that's pretty efficient and effective, all things being equal. As I alluded to earlier in the call, I heard from several bankers this morning, some of whom were nervous even as recently as yesterday and the day before, who have now been seeing some of the initial guidance of the way the loan process will work, and they're feeling better about how that will unfold. Now, that's from the banker's side. I need to start hearing a little bit more from small businesses like yourself and some of the restaurateurs and some of the hoteliers and so forth about how it's going to work for them on the back end. But they're moving really quickly. So what we hope is that these loans will start getting processed by Monday, and we'll start moving some of those through quickly, because y'all just can't continue without the financial support necessary in order to continue to keep your doors open, or at least keep paying the rent and keep your stuff stable and keep your payroll going for a few weeks until we can get doors open. So if there's anything you hear of, if Monday rolls around, Tuesday rolls around, reach out to me or your congressman or woman and let us know what's working, what's not working. Because whenever there's this sort of phase 4 process, well, two things. When there's a phase 4, whatever we do next, we can enact some legislative fixes, and we certainly will, because there were things that were rushed through. We already know of some things that need to be fixed. But then secondly, the administration, they've got a lot of leeway to sort of move levers around and make things work. And as Ellen alluded to, the president's doing a good job, Governor Abbott's doing a good job, and others about knocking down some of the regulatory barriers and trying to figure out how to move things quickly. So whatever we can do within the law, we have to maintain our adherence to the rule of law. We're going to do. We're going to be knocking these doors and these barriers down. And that's one last point I would make to you and all the other listeners as a small business owner. Let us know what's in your way. The biggest glaring thing is that you don't have customers because people are staying at home. Okay, we're going to work to try to fix that as soon as we can, as we get the healthcare stabilized. But what else is in your way? Like if you got creative ways that you can try to be making a living or serve your customers, and there's a barrier to that, let us know. We'll try to knock it down. Whether this lasts for 2 more weeks or for 3 weeks or 2 months, we need to do whatever we can to sort of knock some of those barriers down. And also just let the governor's office and the state of Texas know how important it is for you all to find ways to get back to full productivity. We're trying to balance dealing with the healthcare crisis, but let us know in the federal government and in the state level, look, I need X to be able to get up and running, because we're trying to figure out how to balance getting our economy up and running as soon as humanly possible.
Thank you, Congressman. I'd like to remind everyone, if you click on your name, you'll see a little raise hand icon, and you could do that to ask a question. I have someone texted me a question for you. You know, will there be more another round of stimulus? I know there's one about infrastructure being discussed right now, and who initiates those? And then also, how do we make sure that states like mine, Illinois, that are not the most fiscally responsible states will try to get a bailout, right, out of this, right? And so love your comment on that. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that question. A couple different parts to it. First, will there be additional phases? Almost certainly. As sure as the sun will rise tomorrow, there's going to be more legislation on this. I will be honest, full disclosure, I'm going to be increasingly skeptical of every bill that comes down the pike now. We spent $2 trillion last week, which is a large amount of money. We needed to do it because businesses need that money. We will need to make some legislative fixes, and we may well need to have additional support in different areas where maybe we missed it last week. But the idea, I mean, let's just think about this for a second. The Federal Reserve has allocated $4 trillion to be used here as capital to try to get liquidity in the market, and we spent $2 trillion last week. That's $6 trillion we've just allocated to deal with this. Now we're talking about a $2 trillion transportation infrastructure package that the president alluded to the other day, and I know there's some other things being talked about in Congress. I'm going to start being one of those that says, okay, guys, let's combat the virus. Let's beat the virus, and let's keep our businesses afloat, the people who are being denied the ability of their livelihoods. You or the questioner used the word stimulus. That's a word that I actually start to push back on right now a little bit, because this is not the same kind of, and it's normal, I'm not being critical, everybody uses the word stimulus. I'm trying to remind people, this is a little bit more like the government taking something and you being made whole. This is kind of like a utility or a road or a pipeline going through your property, and the government's saying they're going to take it, and then you getting paid for that. Because right now the government is saying to your business, you can't do business. You can't have customers. People can't come into your store because we're having to socially distance. That's close to a governmental taking, right? In the name of public health, the government is saying, well, for the greater good, you can't make your living. That, to me, is a reason for government to step in to make you whole. That's not really economic stimulus as much as just helping you get by, because you're not allowed to go do your thing that you're supposed to do to go make a living. So I think that's an important distinction when you think about it, because some people are thinking, well, we shouldn't have spent the money. Some of my conservative friends are saying, well, on Friday, we shouldn't have done the $2 trillion. I said, well, maybe not in exactly how I would have done it, but we needed to spend that money on Friday because we need to make Americans whole who are now being, again, for some good reason, deprived their livelihood because we need to go deal with the pandemic. So from my standpoint, we need to go fight and win the war against coronavirus. We have to do that. And we have to fight to get our businesses up and running as soon as humanly possible. We need to look at models like South Korea and others, Japan, other places where people change their habits, their protocols, wear masks. We got to produce the masks and get our ability to use those. But we got to find a way to be able to operate sooner rather than later. And I'll make one last point on that. The president has received some cheering and some jeering for having sort of thrown out an aspirational goal of, by Easter, and now he's amended it to May 1 of trying to get our economy back. I actually applaud the president on this. I've been a critic of his in the past, and I've been a supporter on things in the past. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you fall on. The president's job is to be aspirational in this case, and I think it's important for him to put out there a marker. We need to be working together to figure out how to solve the crisis, the healthcare crisis, get over the hump, and figure out how to get our economy back as soon as we reasonably can. And I think he's right to sort of put that marker out there.
So along those lines, Congressman, what do you think the timeline looks like going forward? I mean, I know it's impossible for anybody to really know, and that we're hearing, the virus may spike in the next couple of weeks, and then hopefully we would be on the other side of the curve. But, I think one thing that's causing uncertainty for me and my family and my business is, well, am I preparing for a 3-week shutdown, or am I preparing for a 6-month or 18-month shutdown? And I know you have advocated In your op-ed a couple weeks ago, you were one of the first people to say, like, we need some clarity on where we go from here and what our expectations should be, so that we know what the goals are, we know what the benchmarks are. What are your thoughts on that right now?
Well, thanks for asking that question, Ellen, and for all you out there listening. So, like, there is no magic formula here, and I hope everybody is starting to realize to dial it down on both sides of the aisle as to kind of the right approaches specifically to picking a date or not. There's this kind of warring noise on Twitter and social media saying, you are over here saying we got to start the economy up tomorrow and let people die, and there are people over here saying you're going to let everybody go into a depression because you're focused on the healthcare. It's not an either or, right? This is a process by which we get back to normalcy in a way that works within the framework of the pandemic that we're dealing with. To answer your question, you asked point blank timing. I don't know. I think that now the president and Doctors Birx and Fauci and others agreeing to sort of look at May 1st, he kind of put out another 30 days. So now we're looking around May 1st as a time to be targeting and looking toward. Look, I think that's as good of a time as any, right? That's, 30 days from now. And so what can we do in 30 days as the American people to arrest the spread of the virus, get control of it, make our mask production, ventilator production, tests getting out? How do we get on top of all that and then adjust our society to be able to engage in our livelihoods? I'm guessing that sometime by May, we'll be able to start adjusting our lives to work within the parameters of being able to get back to our lives. Does that mean that every restaurant can be open the same way? Does that mean that, people will be racing back to schools? Does that mean that the elderly should be, going right back out in society? No, we're probably going to have some time to sort of ease back into some way of functioning. But we have to. The GDP projections for the second quarter right now are utterly devastating, right? We're looking at 25% drop off. It's unheard of type numbers. Right now, we had the 3.2 million unemployment number last week spike. Now we're looking at another 2 to 3 million this week. That number is just going to keep climbing if we don't find a way to patch, bridge, and then get to a place where we're able to adjust our way of life so that we can get our economy back fully functioning. And look, let me just say this: God bless all of the doctors, nurses, people on the front lines, the truckers driving through the night, the people at home making masks for people, the businesses, like I said, Brooks Brothers is changing gears, GM, Tesla, Ford, they're all changing their manufacturing plants, private sector stepping up, charity stepping up. This is the greatness of America shining. It really is. This is just like the Cajun Navy coming over to help the Harvey victims in Houston. Americans step up. We're going to step up, and we're doing it here. And we'll get through this, and I hope we'll get to a date certain so our economy can get revved up again soon.
Great, thank you. I think we have one question from Nicole Klein. Do you want to ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, hi, Nicole. How are you?
Hello, hi. Question for you about taxes specifically. There's been some conversation around freezing taxes, and one proposal that I heard that I liked, that I wanted to kind of get your perspective on is, there's a lot of people right now who are out of work, but they do have retirement savings and 401k savings. So is there an opportunity for those folks to tap into those savings as a reserve instead of relying on checks from the government, but freezing the penalty that they would typically get when they tap into those savings? I think it's like 10% or something like that. So I'd love to hear if like you or your colleagues are having those conversations about ways that people can be self-sufficient with the wealth that they already have.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, like all homebound workers, I'm making my kids stay outside right now. No, number one, there were a few tax-related provisions that were in the bill last week, and I'm not going to outline them all right now because I might get one wrong or say it wrong based on memory. But there's some good summaries. I think my website has some of them up, and we can look around. And I'm happy to get something to y'all to circulate that outlines some of the taxes that were delayed, like some of the quarterly filings, April 15th filing deadline, stuff like that. But there are other provisions we've been looking at, as you mentioned, ways to be able to minimize penalties or eliminate penalties for pulling money out of retirement funds or even some education savings accounts, depending on what you need to use for your kids, because now you've got to deal with daycare while you're trying to deal with your kids at home and things like that. But also, we're looking at future proposals, ways to try to spur economic activity through the rest of this year, because we're going to have to kickstart everything One way would be to potentially suspend the payroll tax to help everybody be able to sort of get another boost for those that are working, so you're no longer having to pay your payroll tax. Maybe to eliminate all capital gains for anybody that's investing in assets or in their businesses right now for the rest of the year. We could suspend capital gains for businesses. There are other proposals like that would have, you could make expensing, make it 100% expensing like right away this year for businesses, so that you could encourage people to, okay, this thing's over, start investing capital, knowing that whatever return you get on the capital this year would be tax-free. And that would be a way to sort of jumpstart activity. So we're looking at a lot of different ways to try to move those levers. The problem is, of course, if you do that, people are going to say, well, you're trying to enrich, corporations and businesses. Well, what I'm trying to do is just get jobs going, get jobs created, get people out working and so forth. Again, payroll tax would be something that would probably help a lot of workers if you, suddenly were able to save that 7.5 or 15%, both employee and employer side. So those are a number of different ways we're looking at it, and happy to take ideas. Reach out to my office. If you got thoughts as a business owner, I want to hear them. Again, this is the more the merrier. We're trying to figure out how to navigate through this in a way to get through it, knowing that we're going to take a hit in terms of our debt. Right now, if we spend upwards of the $6 to $8 trillion that's already on the table, now some of that we'll get back because it's loans. Some of it we'll get back because it'll be invested and come back to us. So it won't be that full amount. But our total debt is $24 trillion, and we're talking about $8 trillion that we just put on the table last week. So we got to think about how we're navigating through this so that we don't just blow the lid off of our debt.
We have one last question that was texted to us about the impact on education, and if there will be more legislation to address keeping kids on track. And I know education is kind of at the state level, and it's up to each state to really legislate on that, right? So are there like some thoughts though at the federal level, or you're really leaving that up to the state?
Well, as a general rule, you're right. That'd be something that'd be, in this case, we're talking to it predominantly, I think, Texas audience. We'll be leaving it up to the legislature. We'll be meeting next spring, and Governor Abbott to deal with anything that needs to be dealt with. I think they're making a lot of, decisions on the fly that hopefully will be good for parents and kids in order to be able to, learn at home and so forth. I mean, I know my kids they're just finishing up their stuff for the day right now. And they're, staying on track. Doing what they can via video and distance learning. And one of the things that I hope we'll get out of this is a little bit of a sense for what's possible outside of our normal way of doing things. I think you always have to look at the positive in everything. And it's been a shock to our system, but everybody adapts, right? You start figuring out a different way to do things. There's a local guy makes donuts. His store is basically no one's coming in. There's no foot traffic, and he lives right down the block. And so he's now taking donuts every Saturday, and he just goes over to the neighborhoods, opens up his truck and starts selling them. And of course they come out and he does it actually all week, and he's making as much money as he was before. Now he's got a captive audience, so it may not change his business model, but everybody I'm talking to is finding ways to adapt, change their business model, figure out ways to make things work. Schools are doing that. I saw a great tweet this morning where there was a girl who didn't understand a math question. And she told her teacher by email or phone, I don't know what, but the teacher showed up outside of her house, of course, social distancing, with a whiteboard, and kind of drew the, whatever it was. I don't remember what it was, the geometry or something on the whiteboard, teaching her through the glass so that she could understand it. Everybody's trying to figure out how to adapt and step up. And hopefully we'll get through this time, and it'll only be this academic year that's impacted, and we'll all be back in full speed in late August.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for this candid conversation. Congressman, is really, really, I think, helpful for everyone to understand your thought process, how you consult also with your constituency, and you're not making these decisions out there in DC, that you're there close to the ground. So thank you. Thank you for representing Texas, and thank you for sharing. So, I know you have to go, but I'd like to, I want to let everybody know that we'll be posting a summary of this conversation. We'll be making the Zoom recording also available to the greater membership, because there's great insights here that everyone will want to know about. And I have like kind of 3 action items for people on the call here is one is to really plan your next Zoom meeting. If you visit our site, we have the tools to do that. You go on zoom.us and you can sign up, and it's very easy to do. There's 2 topics that you could talk about. One is, there's you could discuss the Texas Road to Recovery. I want to put a plug in here for the Texas Public Policy Foundation. They have a really excellent series of podcasts. It's called Road to Recovery, and that could be a great topic of discussion. As well as I mentioned today is National Census Day. We publish a deep dive on the census and why it matters. A lot of decisions are being made based on census data. You can discuss that in your circle as a family. You can complete the census. So I'd like to invite you to do that. You go to 2020census.gov. And guys, on your screen right now, we have a very brief survey. So please complete it so that we can improve for the future. So, fill out the little survey that's appearing on your screen. And then, this is a tour. We're going on a tour each week at each of our state. We encourage you, each of the circle, to host a meeting, maybe at the state level, at your local level. If you haven't, visit our website, click on Start a Circle, or I've been referred, and become a circle leader. The Policy Circle is a great forum to really have productive conversations, and we want to hear from you. You can email us at communications@thepolicycircle.org. Our communications person, Mary Shaper, would love to hear your stories. And we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We look to your support. So again, we invite you to visit our site, thepolicycircle.org, to do that. So complete the survey here that's in front of you for those who are online. Those on the phone, Judy, do you have some last comment here for our participants?
I just appreciate everybody signing in. I'm here to help you if you would like to use Zoom in your own policy circle meetings. It's a great way to stay connected. And I just want to encourage all of us that we really are the answer, that we can be supportive for each other, and we will come through this, and we will be better than ever. So I just want to encourage all of us to just keep being involved and be the bright spot in other people's days. So yeah, we're good. Is anybody taking the poll? Because I'm seeing something different than you guys are seeing. So I'm gonna want to have feedback on that too. So
yeah, I think people are taking the poll.
Good.
I've taken it, so we'll have the feedback. So thank you so much, guys, and we love to hear your feedback about this type of programming. The next one we're working on, we had this question around China. We're working on setting up a Move the Needle conversation with someone from the Hudson Institute to talk about the relationship with China. So that question will be addressed in a really broader conversation. So thank you again, and use the Policy Circle as a forum to invite your local representative and come together to have constructive ideas on what to do. So thank you, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.